everybody. A very warm welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining us in person and online. Today's event is called Thriving in Your First. Hope it will be an informative event and you'll be able to pick up a lot of tips and some best practice sort of guidance about how to build a successful practice. My name is Amrit Danoa. I'm the chair of the Young Barristers Committee of the Bar Council for this year. You'll see here the esteemed panelists for our panel session this evening, which we'll begin with. We'll then have a short presentation by Lauren Webb from Fox Williams, who I'm very pleased to say, oh, I can hear that, I think no, my mic is still on. Fine. So I'm very pleased to have Lauren Webb with us from Fox Williams, who will be sharing some best practice tips about how to use LinkedIn and how to grow and build your network online and effectively market your skills. And as we all know, that's very important in this digital age nowadays, much more than it used to be. We will then follow with a Q&A session with all of you here in the audience and online, and after which we'll have a joint networking drinks reception with members of the Junior Solicitors Network, and I hope as many of you as possible here with us in person will be able to join for that. Just a few housekeeping matters. We don't have any planned fire drills, although I must say we just did have one perfectly timed about 5 or 10 minutes ago, so I really hope we don't have another one again. But if you do hear an announcement or a fire alarm, please make sure you make your way to the nearest fire exit. Those of you who are joining us online, you'll be able to post your questions in the Q&A box that you should hopefully see on your screens. The session will be recorded and will be made available to watch via the Bar Council website. And for those of you online as well, please note that the live transcription is available and you can enable it by clicking the live transcription button at the bottom of your screens, which you can hopefully see. So without further ado, we're going to kick off our panel session. And before we get into the substance of why we're here, I would like to introduce our esteemed panelists. So starting immediately to my left, we have Luke Eaton, who is a practicing barrister at One Garden Court, who practices in family law, and he specialises in the law related to children. He's been shortlisted twice in the LexisNexis Awards for the Family Law Young Barrister of the Year, and is also ranked in the Legal 500. Immediately next to him is Zaid Ahmed, who is chair of the Young Criminal Bar Association and a criminal and extradition barrister at Mountford Chambers. He is also a dual qualified duty solicitor. Immediately next to Zaid, we have Daria Dybov, who is immediate past chair of the Junior Solicitors Network and also a medical negligence solicitor at Irwin Mitchell. And last but not least, we have Stephen Wright, who is senior clerk at 7 Bedford Row Chambers. He has over 20 years of experience in clerking, and I'm very glad and fortunate to have him on the panel today. He's responsible for the business development and marketing of Chambers, both nationally and internationally. So I'm sure we'll be able to share a very valuable perspective from the clerking room, as it is the sort of heartbeat of Chambers. Right, to kick off, I wondered if, Luke, you could share your experience going back, I suspect sometime now, to when you started tenancy and your first year of practice and having finished pupillage. How did it feel?
Sure. So without stating the obvious, I think when you go from being a pupil to being a tenant, it's a massive step and a massively scary one, going from having a supervisor who's there as part of their job, frankly, to make sure that you're doing okay, that you're not doing anything wrong, to being or feeling perhaps like you're completely on your own and all your mistakes are your own is a big thing. But it's a really exciting step, as I found it, and hopefully the start of a long career. I think if I was going to give advice to people about thriving in their first few years of practice, again, without wanting to state the obvious, I think that relationships are is essentially the key thing to cultivate in those first few years. And by that, I mean relationships with your clerks, who are there to support you in every practical way, and there to help you bring work in, there to help you when things are tough, there to help you when things are difficult. I think relationships with your professional clients, so everything from marketing, going to marketing events, meeting solicitors, all the way through to the sort of niceties of the phone call after the hearing to let the solicitor know how things have gone, to the detailed attendance note. And then relationships with other barristers in your chambers. I mean, I'm sure, again, this is an obvious thing to say, but once you stop having a people supervisor, that's not the end of people in chambers being there to support you. And I think so much of this job, especially for those with a court-based practice, is judgment. And you just don't have that in your first few years of practice because you've not been doing it for long enough. And once you're no longer a pupil, you're still really just borrowing people's judgment to use for yourself in court. And so having that group of people in chambers you can ring when there's a difficult issue the night before, or you can ring when something mad happens at court, I think that's absolutely essential. So yeah.
Thanks, Luke. I think you've touched on a lot of important aspects there. And I think one thing I would say at the outset is that when you start tenancy, at least I know it was the same for me, that you should never feel that you're alone. I mean, everybody who you'll have in your network, starting with those in chambers, have all been in the same position that you are in. And so always feel that you have that support network and reach out, especially if you are thrown in the deep end, which will happen quite often. Zaid, I wonder if you could share your experiences when you sort of started in your first year and how you felt.
Certainly. My start wasn't the best, if I can put it in that way. I didn't enjoy where I was in terms of my chambers, and I didn't enjoy the work I was doing. So fortunately, I didn't have the great moment where you finish your pupillage and you get tenancy and you're earning loads of money. That didn't happen for me. So what I decided to do was look around and try and find a home where I would be supported, where I would have some good work, and where I would be able to thrive. And that was certainly my journey at the beginning of my career. And so I moved to a chambers that did that supported me, that had a nice familial feel to it, and where I could actually start to build my practice. Because when you become a junior tenant, it's your practice. No one else is going to do it for you. No one's going to support you in the same way that you have to support yourself. And you're the person that has to go out there and get those results, build those relationships, and make sure that your clients, whether that's your lay client or your professional client, is happy with what you've done. So my advice to you at the start of your career is very straightforward. Just do your best. It sounds silly. It sounds very silly, but often after people think, oh, I'm a tenant now, I can relax. Finally, I've got that tenancy. I can't lose my job. I'm going to settle down and take things slowly. I advise against that. My advice to you would be, make sure when you get that brief, you do your utmost, your best, and that work will shine through. Your solicitors will see that, your clients will see that, and that's in fact how I have been able to build a practice, is by doing my utmost, by working really hard and by getting those great results. And that's my key thing for you to take away, is that don't get complacent because you've got tenancy. Do your best, work hard, and that will shine. And that will shine through with the clerks and with your lay clients as well as your professional clients. So that was certainly my route. And now I'm very happy I've got work that comes because I work really hard.
Thank you, Zaid. That's really informative. We hear a lot about sort of the importance of clerks, and Zaid and Luke, you've both touched on how intrinsic a part that is in terms of building your practice, especially when you're in those early years. We're fortunate enough to have a senior clerk on the panel.
It's about to die.
It's Steve with us, who will be able to, I'm sure, share some very valuable insights into how important that relationship is to develop with your clerks, and to make sure you do so really from the very beginning of tenancy, and I'm sure probably as well during pupillage. Steve, one, how important is that relationship, and two, how can juniors establish that communication?
I mean, firstly, I think it's very important. I think that there's one word really, is communication. I think if you want to thrive as a barrister, you need to communicate well with the people around you, like Luke and Syed have mentioned there earlier. If you take my chambers, for example, we have with our, because although this is based on sort of a year experience, your practice evolves over sort of a longer period than that. And I was talking to Luke earlier before this session started, and even now at sort of 8-9 years cool, he's still thinking about how to adapt his practice. So I suppose it's always a movable feast. Don't think that after 3 years, this is my practice, this is where I want to take it, or this is what I should be doing because this is what I've been told. I think that push back on your clerks. If there's something that you don't want to do, then say. I'm not saying, straight away. I mean, that's just, don't be silly, because you don't want to upset them on your first day of tenancy. But I think that regular practice meetings or career development reviews, that we call them, setting out structure, put in a year focus, 1, 2, 3 year plan, even a 5-year plan. I sat down with my new tenants before Christmas and discussed it with them. And I just asked that question, where do you want to be in 5 years? And they looked at me and went, are you crazy, Steve? What are you saying? 7BR where I'm at, we're a multidisciplinary set, so we can offer them sort of loads of different opportunities in different areas of law. But in truth, when you come to the bar, you sort of have a feel of what you want to do anyway, but don't think that it stops there. There are other opportunities. But the key word is communication, really. And looking at, you've all gone to university, you've all made those links. Now, some of your friends have become solicitors as well. Use those links. It's about what Zayed said about sort of making those relationships, and what Luke was saying earlier, relationships with people that you can build with over time. This is a profession that you're going to be in, hopefully, for a long time, 30, 40 years. There's some barristers that have celebrated 50 years recently. I'm not saying do that, but you're going to grow with these people. So, utilize the people you know. My granddad used to say, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And use that to your advantage.
Excellent, thank you, Steve. An important point that you mentioned was about practice review meetings or practice development meetings, as they're called. And that's a hugely important part, I think, in the early years, making sure that juniors are taking the time with their clerks to sit down, assess where their practice is and where they want to go in terms of development. And as you say, quite rightly asking tenants, well, where do you see your practice in sort of 5 years' time? And I suspect how clerks and chambers can help juniors to get there.
Yeah, exactly. And that could be sort of, different panels that they could go on to, or you could go on to. It could be they're asking for sort of leading work. There's a time that you can do that. Even to the point of when you get to sort of, 15, 16 years cool and you're looking for silk. It sounds crazy, but, the rule of thumb is that most people apply for silk when they're sort of around, unless you're in a commercial set, obviously, but sort of probably around sort of 20 years cool plus. But you need to start thinking about it a lot earlier than that. And I suppose this is what I'm trying to say, is just keep communicating with your clerk. And if you're not happy, push back. You don't have to, if they're sort of saying to you, take on this case, but if you don't think it's right, then just say no. I want to say, I'm probably going to shoot myself in the foot, and you're going to go back to your senior clerks and go, Steve said this, but look, you're self-employed. The bottom line is, as clerks and as, practice managers or CEOs, whatever they want to call it, we're trying to run a business, and we're trying to, extract as much out of you as possible to earn as much money as possible for chambers. But you are self-employed. So, there is a work-life balance to this as well.
Yeah, can I echo that? I think it's really important at the start of your kind of journey in the criminal bar particularly, that when you realise that you don't like a certain area of work, because there is a multitude of areas. For example, I really didn't like doing protest work because it was so voluminous. It used to take up so much of my time. And there was constant human rights arguments that you have to make, and you got paid very little for it. So I made it very clear after I started doing that work that actually I don't want to do that anymore. And the clerks respected that, because they were like, well, we can see that, in fact, you don't enjoy it, and we want to make sure that you have other opportunities in other areas. So if you don't like something that you're doing, obviously give it a go. because you can't then say to them, the reason why you didn't enjoy it was X, Y, and Z, but make sure you have those discussions with your clerks. You know, they do work for you. Technically, they do work for you, and so you should make sure that you utilise that kind of connection with them, and have that avenue so that you can speak to them on an informal basis, not just a formal basis, so that you feel happy in your early years. Because without having that, you'll just feel very miserable, and your career at the bar, if it starts off that way, it won't particularly go very well, because you'll just resent the type of work you're doing, and that is extremely important that you don't get into the habit when you've just started.
Sorry, just points on the bit you said there about it wasn't paid very well. You know, be mindful of that. You know, don't just do a case because they say that that's right. You know, to do. You've got to think that again, you're at the bar to earn money. So if there's certain cases, especially take crime for example, you know, publicly funded work isn't the best work, and you'll do a mention or a PCPH that will pay X, Y, and Z. But the bigger picture is that if you do the trial, you get the bigger fee. But you know, there are cases where I've seen before where junior counsel will be told to do sort of low-paying work just to appease a firm of solicitors. If you don't want to do it, again, you're self-employed. You can make that call. Again, do not repeat this to your senior clerk. You know.
No, please go on. Luke.
If I can add in on the back of that, I think that get the practical stuff sorted as soon as you can as well. So things like boring stuff like tax, you know how much to save, have an accountant who's telling you when you need to pay it, payment protection insurance, all those kind of things. Get it done at an early stage so that you're set up and you have the building blocks and frankly the headspace to focus on the job. And then I also think at a very early stage in your first year, you should be thinking about things like how often are you going to need to take holidays? I mean, I have what I would say is quite an intense court practice. I take holidays as frequently as there are half terms in a school calendar because that's what I need to not burn out. Some people who have paper practices, that might be very different. I think you've got to factor in as well your sort of financial objectives as well. You know, are you saving for a house? If so, what kind of work do you need to do in your first few years to be able to save a deposit? Is that going to impact long term on the type of work that's available for you? You know, are you happy to go to court and do the RTAs, the CPS lists, the ICOs and care cases that build those advocacy practices but aren't very well paid, in the hope that there'll be a payoff in your advocacy skills later on in your career? Or do you have sort of liquidity or financial obligations straight away that you need to fulfill? I think those are practical questions that you shouldn't shy away from in your first few years because they're going to affect your financial and mental stability in the long term, and you can't build a practice without either of those two things.
I think that's a great way. What you just picked up on there is that the lower end type of work that many chambers do, I think it's great to sort of build those relationships with those solicitors, but there is a cut-off point. You know, I don't think you need to do them for sort of 12 months, 24 months. You can do enough for sort of 6 months, and then right, I've done my stint.
Yeah, excellent. Some very valuable advice there. And as Luke has touched on, outside of obviously speaking to your clerks and making sure you've got that open communication line with them to be able to confidently speak about how you want your practice to evolve. There are so many other aspects when you're starting in tenancy that you should be bearing in mind. And a lot of these things will take some sort of learning and getting used to, especially getting your tax affairs in order, making sure that you sort of get your self-assessment tax return done by the deadline, making sure you're keeping proper records of all sort of your expenses and so on, and even knowing about sort of keeping your money perhaps that will be sort of used for tax purposes, I know is very helpful to sort of have in a separate pot, as it were, away from sort of other sort of financial money that you'll be using for other purposes. But Luke rightly said there are other things going on that you will have to factor into your practice. For example, you know, whether you want to buy a house, you've got to take out a mortgage, and you might those things might directly impact the sort of the route that your practice will take. And I think that the valuable advice we've heard is don't ever be afraid to sort of speak up with your clerks in practice review meetings or otherwise, if there is a certain area of work you don't want to do or something else you'd like to try. One particular tip I'd give, especially in early years and in a set where, for example, you might not be certain about what type of work you want to do, is be nimble and be adaptable. Make sure you're open to trying different areas. It's probably not the best way in terms of showcasing yourself to clerks and chambers if you say straight from the get-go that this is just something I don't want to do without trying it first. And it might be something that you genuinely don't like, which is fine, but then you're able to have conversations about what else is available. Another aspect I wanted to explore, which is an important relationship to start building in your early years, which will put you in good stead when it comes to building a practice, is your relationship with solicitors, so your professional client. And it's important that I think early on in practice, you know how to do that right. So fortunate to have Daria with us, who is a practicing solicitor. Daria, what should juniors know about building a successful relationship with solicitors, and what do solicitors want from counsel?
Well, thank you, Amrit. Thank you for inviting me here. I was sat here listening to my free learners friends, and I just realized I have an admission to make. I don't think I've ever actually spoken at the events which were designated specifically to the barristers. So mostly I speak at the solicitors events, and it has been such a revelation to me that actually young solicitors, well, junior solicitors, let's say, because they can be any age, you can start practicing and, later in life. So junior solicitors and junior barristers actually meet very similar issues, like feeling of loneliness, someone mentioned here, financial planning, imposter syndrome, feeling not very confident. And actually, I think at the solicitors events, we can see these things coming through as well. Now talking about, taking work or not taking work, in civil litigation, we have a slightly different approach. We have this little book called Code of Conduct, and we are very heavily regulated by the regulator. And the Code of Conduct says that if you feel for any reason that you can't get the best result in this case for your client, for whatever reason, for your moral obligations, for the things that you might be lacking some skills in certain areas or lacking experience, then you shouldn't take this case, because there will be somebody else who will love to take that case on, and they will be better, representing your client. So that's something we do in civil litigation, but obviously in criminal, I think it's slightly different, because everyone has the right to fair and legal representation. So even if, if you're representing someone who you think shouldn't, who you don't like as a person, you think still should represent them. So I think that's the criminal approach. In terms of what we expect usually from the barristers, probably I will go back to Steve's comment. I think he probably just nailed it the best, because he said communication. So I'll probably repeat again, communication is the key, because we are working on the case from the very beginning, and you as barristers coming in when we actually need a specialized advice. So I think it's important to start communication as early as possible in the process, and then just follow through with it and kind of give a little hints and, sometimes nudge your solicitors as well on where the case is going, because when you have so many cases going as we do, sometimes it's difficult to always keep the barristers updated. In my practice, for example, I had a barrister at the firm where I was training. So he was from one of the chambers at the Temple, and he was coming about maybe every month or every couple of months to our firm, and everyone knew he was coming. He would send an emails to, or his clerk or his assistant would send an emails to everyone who specializes in that area. And that made it so easy, because you knew, okay, this person is coming on this day. So if there is anything else you would like to tell him or discuss with him, even if it's 5 minutes, even if you just wanted to say, okay, I might have this case for you, in 6 months' time, but now this is what's happening. Do you think that's what I should do? Just that, initial approach and of him. And then when he already knows about your cases and the kind of cases and the clients coming in, he can then be prepared when it comes in 6 months to dedicate his time, his attention, experience as well, just maybe do some research, etc. So that's one of the helpful tricks one of the barristers was doing, and he was very successful with getting more work and more type of work that he wanted to get out of the law firm.
Daria, anything you've seen from your time instructing counsel that has made you not want to instruct counsel again? Some sort of bad experiences you've had that we can make sure juniors steer clear of?
Bad experiences. Yeah. So I actually, every event I come, I always bring stories. So today I brought few stories about the barristers as well. So generally I don't have any bad stories, but I have a couple of stories. So for example, when I was invited to this event, I personally don't have any bad stories with the barristers because I'm very open. I keep the open dialogue, but I asked my colleague, I said, did you have any difficulties with a barrister? And she said, well, recently, she said, so she's a medical negligence lawyer, and she was working on this very big case. And there is a stage where you have to serve your particulars, your schedule of loss, your claim form. And at her firm, it was the rule that you have to do everything at once. So not in 4 months, just because, you could not miss that. So not to miss that, the rule was you serve everything at once. So she instructed the barrister, she had him instructed, and then she did not know when the schedule of loss will come in, but she had the deadline to serve. So she, obviously, the barrister drafted particulars, she checked with him on the claim form, she instructed him, he responded, everything was ready to serve except the schedule of loss. And then the day after that, she gets the schedule of loss. So everything is still fresh in the barrister's mind. And then she gets the schedule of loss and she writes to the barrister. So the service date is tomorrow. She got it today. He prepared his job yesterday. And then she contacted the barrister and she asked, look, can you cast your eye on the schedule of loss? Because it has been prepared by the department who prepare schedules of loss. So they already incurred the cost of preparing the schedule of loss. Then we have her solicitor taking instructions on the schedule and also preparing it. So that's her time as well. And then she's sending it to the barrister, and the barrister's response was, well, I've already dealt with this matter. If you would like to instruct me again, please send me formal instructions, and then I will formally charge you for this additional work. Now, obviously, the problem she has, so first of all, she's already sent instructions yesterday, so it's all fresh in his mind. Well, not yesterday, but for that yesterday's job. And then second of all, she doesn't have time to draft another instruction. She has to serve it ASAP. And then also, if she will draft another instructions and get another bill, then she will get criticized and scrutinized for excessive or disproportionate costs, because we're solicitors, we get scrutinized by, we all have targets as well in a law firm, so we don't work for ourselves. So we can't really say how much we're going to charge. So we have to charge in a proportionate way, because when our case comes to trial, or say detailed assessment, and the trial judge will look at our costs, they will probably get slashed, and the judge will say, oh, okay, so why do you have 4 people working on the schedule of loss? So essentially they will say, okay, so for the barrister at this point, it wasn't essential to charge for the schedule of loss to see it because it's been already prepared. So therefore, we're not giving you money for the barrister. And then that money has to come out from somewhere. And as the solicitors, we love paying our barristers. We don't want for them to get underpaid. We want to pay them as much as possible. So that's not something we like. So we so my colleague, she was left in this limbo, because on one hand, she wanted for the barrister to see the schedule just in case if there are any things he disagrees with, because he will be pleading them in court. So, he could amend them. But on the other hand, she couldn't do it because she would get criticized by her management, by the trial judge, by everyone else. So that's the little limbo she was in. And from here, I can see 2 lessons coming out. So first of all, communication. So she hasn't communicated to the barrister that okay, there is a schedule of laws, someone coming in, hold on preparing, finalizing your work, wait for the schedule. And also from the barrister as well, because he was a very experienced barrister, but even if you're not, you know that the schedule in medical negligence cases should be served shortly or thereafter with a particular, so within 4 months. So you kind of expect for that to come in. So the barrister should have asked, look, do you want for me to look at it now? Or do you want me to charge you later? And then she would have said probably no. So sometimes, unfortunately, as a self-employed barristers, I think my best advice is just to think ahead, just be ahead of your solicitor, be ahead of your client, just think ahead always what can happen, what can go wrong. And then that's my best advice.
Thank you, Daria, for sharing sort of those anecdotal experiences. I think from that we can obviously take that it's very important to make sure that you have a good relationship with your solicitor and to be responsive. So a solicitor will always be looking to counsel for their expertise, but also guide them, especially depending on when you're instructed. If you're instructed quite early on in sort of a long journey of litigation, the solicitor will be looking to you for advice at various stages. And one sort of tip I would give is don't be afraid to pick up the phone as well. And solicitors, Daria, I'm sure you can resonate with this, that you would find that valuable to be able to speak to counsel directly on the phone, especially where there are upcoming deadlines for various things, because time limits are so important, as I'm sure you all know. And the last thing you want is sort of for the lay client to find out that you've missed a pretty important deadline, and there are going to be obviously consequences for that. One thing you touched on as well, or in the sense of sort of, upcoming sort of deadlines and sort of time limits for various things. You will find in sort of your early years of practice that your diary can be very busy with court commitments or advisory work. So knowing how to sort of manage that workload is, I think, a very fundamental part of sort of managing your practice as it goes forward. Zaid, I'll probably start with you. How did you sort of manage your workload in the early years, and did you find it challenging?
So I was quite lucky because I was, in fact, training to be a solicitor when I got pupillage. So I didn't finish my training contract. I then started pupillage, and so I never qualified as a solicitor, but I was working as a trainee for some time, and so I know exactly what solicitors ask for, particularly in the criminal sphere or area. So the way that I managed to prioritize the work or make sure that I didn't miss any deadlines was diarized everything. My diary was my Bible.
What did you use? Did you use paper or did you use
Outlook?
Yeah.
So Outlook, I don't know how many of you here use Outlook, but it syncs up with your phone. So if you put an entry into Outlook and you save it on your laptop, it'll be on your calendar on your iPhone. So what I used to do was, in a criminal, in a criminal area, you get deadlines that are usually a lot sooner than in a civil litigation matter. So, for example, if you have to draft the defence statement for a client, that's normally done within about a month after their plea hearing. So you have to fit these diary commitments into your Outlook calendar. That's what I did to make sure you didn't miss it. And coming back to what the solicitors expect, the last thing the solicitors want is to chase you for things. They hate it. And in fact, when I used to instruct counsel, if I used to have to remind a counsel to do something, I wouldn't instruct them again. That's how harsh I was. So I take that approach now when I'm at counsel. I make sure that I don't have to get my solicitor to ask me twice for something as simple as a defence statement or a particular skeleton on a particular argument. So that's how I did it. I made sure that I had all my deadlines in my diary. Often things come up. People get sick. We're allowed to get ill, we're allowed to be sick, we're allowed to take some rest days. If that's the case, just simply email your solicitor and say, well, I know this is due by this day, I'm due to be away, and I will have this by this following day, and I apologise for any inconvenience. Just be very, very clear and very, very communicate, as I say, and make sure you don't miss those deadlines, because once you've done that, you're in their bad books, and it's quite hard to get out from under that. And in fact, the clerks will hear it. They're the first person that gets that email. Oh, I instructed Zaid, he didn't do this, don't want him again, who else have you got? That's what happens. So please be attentive to those deadlines and make sure you diarise them.
Yeah, I think that's super valuable advice, and also factoring in breaks as well. I think for in terms of sort of not just taking time away from practice if you need it. which Luke, you touched on earlier about, you know, if you need a break and you need to go away and sort of catch your breath, as it were, you are able to do it. And that's something you should be comfortable telling your clerks, that, look, I've had, you know, a significant run in the courts recently. I'm just exhausted. I really need to take some time out. And they will understand that. It's really important that you prioritize your well-being in that way. Really important, Luke, that obviously you mentioned about sort of taking those breaks, but what I was going to add is obviously factoring in time for prep as well, especially where you know you've got sort of drafting to do and you know there's an upcoming deadline to draft particulars or a defence. You know, keep on top of those deadlines. You know, solicitors will always find it extremely helpful if you're proactive in reaching out to them and saying, look, I know we've got this deadline coming up, you know, what's the update? Do we have what we need? What else do we need? And they will really value that. Luke, as I said, you talked about sort of making sure you're taking sufficient breaks. How did you sort of manage your diary and your workload? And was there anything else that you did to sort of help in that respect?
I think I definitely echo what you said about prep days. I think they're really, really important, especially if you have a court-based practice. You need to have a discussion with your clerks about, you know, how long it's going to take you to prepare for things. And now my clerk and I have a pretty good relationship where he knows if a certain type of hearing comes in, I'm going to need however many prep days, and he'll put those in without me even having to ask for it now, which is really helpful. And I think if you can establish that kind of relationship very early on, then that's excellent. I think that when you're in your first few years of practice, the temptation is to say yes to absolutely everything because you want to please your clerks, you want to earn as much money as possible, and you want to form as many relationships with solicitors as you can. But I think that is quite a dangerous path to take because you can spread yourself much too thinly. And it's much better that you do a really good job for fewer solicitors than a bang average job for as many solicitors as you can. And you get the reputation as someone who's okay, but not great. You want to be the person who's great. So I think you can have that constructive conversation with your clerks that you don't want to be overburdened with work, which is quite a scary conversation to have in your first few years. I mean, some people have that conversation and think, God, I'll never get work from the clerks ever again. But I don't know if you think this, Steve, but I think that actually it's the opposite. I think the clerks respect someone who knows themselves and who knows how to manage their own practice, because they then know that they can rely on you. That if they ask you to do a piece of work, they're not going to get a call the night before saying, oh God, I'm so sorry, but I just haven't got around to it. Please, can you ring the solicitor and make an excuse for me? They know that you're dependable because you're on top of things. So I think having those conversations that might seem like difficult conversations early on has to be much better stead for the long term.
Yeah, there's nothing worse than ringing up a solicitor and letting them down. You just need to sort of nip it in the bud straight from the off, because if you start doing that, people just get, you know, like Diara said, that it's difficult, you know, and I think you just need to make time for yourself. We're in this world now where we've got to think about our mental health, you know, and work-life balance is key. You'll earn lots of money as barristers. There's no two ways about it. You know, if you've got the right people behind you supporting you, your team of clerks and other barristers in chambers, you'll do very well. So you can turn down cases. When you turn down a case, just remember it's only one case. It's not the end of the world, you know. And I think that there was a point that Luke was mentioning about sort of finances and stuff like that. And when you're having your career development reviews, ask your clerk, how much am I going to earn? How much am I going to earn in year 3, year 5? They'll know, but again, it works both ways. It depends how much work you're going to put into this. If you're sensible and manage your diary correctly, it'll be fine. But sorry, I'd just like to say, sort of going on to sort of marketing, is that what you need to aim for is, say, half a dozen solicitors that regularly instruct you. So by year 8, 10 of practice, your diary disappears for the next month, you know, collapses, and it does happen. But then your clerks speak to you, you know, and if you're in regular communication, you ring them and say, Steve, my diary's collapsed. What are we going to do? Well, hold on a minute. I'll just ring X, Y, and Z. And then before you know it, it will be filled up. But that with marketing, you know, you need to be very particular of who you you aim for, but aim for sort of 4 to 6 solicitors, and start now. Don't wait. You know, your chambers. I don't know what chambers you're at, but your chambers will have a core list of solicitors and clients that instruct them. Obviously, you're going to utilise them. There's no harm in building relationships with your own individuals, which I'm sure these guys have.
Thank you, Steve. I was going to touch on that actually, the aspect of sort of marketing and business development. No, please. Thank you for doing so. And clearly you should have that in your mind early on about what sort of opportunities there are that you can take advantage of, what sort of solicitors you'd like to build a relationship with. And there are usually lots of different ways you can do that. Even if sort of your chambers are involved in speaking at an event, so you have senior members of chambers sitting on a panel, you can always find a way to be involved. You can speak to clerks and say, is there any way that I can help sort of with preparation, perhaps do some research for whatever the topic might be, even if you're not necessarily speaking on the panel. And in that way, there are opportunities for you to sort of network with the solicitor's firm probably afterwards and start to sort of grow your network professionally in that way. Luke, in terms of sort of marketing and business development, how did you approach that in your early years, and were you involved in sort of that aspect in your area?
Yes, my chambers was really good actually. We've got quite a good marketing department, and from early on they tend to try and pair you up with senior people to go and do talks to firms of solicitors and to get your name out there. But I think the key was being proactive in it. So saying to the clerks, this is the kind of thing I want to do. Going to those drinks events that are on a Thursday and a Friday night, even though you're tired from a long week of work, but you turn up at them, you meet some people who you otherwise wouldn't have known. I mean, I have some solicitors now who I have really good relationships with and who've continued to instruct me that I met at sort of junior lawyers things, junior family lawyers drinks. And so while some of those things can be scary, and I won't pretend that I love those kind of events, they're definitely worth going to. No matter what your friends tell you, you can meet some people there who you can form sort of career-long relationships with, and who will scratch your back, you'll scratch their back, and it'll be worth it for everyone. So I think they are worth it.
Can I just add on that is that you don't need to be there until 1 o'clock in the morning either at these events. You know, some people sort of do that. Honestly, hour max. You know, you can go in an hour, you can speak to 6 people. You know, that is enough for you to walk away with. And if you haven't got them, I'd get business cards, exchange business cards. I know Lauren's going to probably have a go because she's speaking about LinkedIn. You can tap your phone with LinkedIn apparently. But for me, I'm slightly old school, but I'm not that I don't know how to do it either. But the problem is that I forget who I've spoken to. Whereas someone's given me a business card, I flip it over and then just quickly write down 3 things about that person. And it may not be about work related either. It could be that they've got 2 children, they support a football team of X, and their dog's called Y, you know. Just something random that when you follow up the next day or the day after, you can relay something to them. Or it could be they're talking about conferences they'd like to go to. I had that recently last week, where a solicitor was talking about, I don't know what sort of conferences I can go to. So the next day I sent them a list of conferences that I thought that would be worthwhile them going to.
Excellent, thank you. Zaid.
So for those of you that are criminal barristers or pupils, I have 3 tips. So the first one is when you're in court, you're being watched. It's really, really obvious, but solicitors are watching you do your advocacy. And so my number 1 instructing solicitor was in fact a solicitor that was watching me do a bail application. And he was so impressed that he came up to me afterwards, gave me his card, and then since then I get regularly instructed by him. In fact, almost every month I have a case that comes my way from him. So, you're being watched, remember that, and don't be sloppy. Make sure you look the part, make sure you do your best, and make sure you perform on every occasion that you're in court, because you never know who might be watching and who might be impressed by it. The second is publish your wins, your successes. And LinkedIn comes into this, in fact. I think in my chambers, we're quite proactive about publishing our acquittals or our successes, and we look at our engagement. And in fact, from that, I've managed to get solicitors who instruct me just by finding out that I won some weird novel point in some court that they weren't involved in, but they were so, they'd seen that LinkedIn post, and then they've subsequently called my chambers and said, oh, is Zaid available? That's the second. And thirdly, it's really, really straightforward. It's ask, work with your colleagues, work with your peers, your co-pupils or your co-barristers. They're not your opponents. They're not your enemy. They'll help you. So if you speak to a junior tenant who appears to have loads of work from a particular firm of solicitors that they're refusing or they're turning down because they're so busy, ask them to make that connection. Say, well, would you be happy to ask this solicitor to come and have a coffee? Or would you be happy to introduce me to this solicitor at this event? So don't be afraid to ask your colleagues, because they are there to support you as well. If somebody came up to me and said, well, would you mind introducing me to this solicitor? I would never say no. And I think that's the same with most barristers that I know. We're very collegiate and familial. And so those are my 3 tips for you starting out at the very early beginning of your career. Use those 3 things to help you build your profile and make those connections.
I'm just on that last point. I mean, just sort of hit the nail on the head slightly there. Is working as a team, you'll go much further than on your own. So with your colleagues, just work together. And I find that you're, as a chambers and as individuals, you'll have far more success than trying to do it on your own.
Excellent. Daria, I wonder if you could share sort of your experience of sort of business development opportunities, or I guess having perhaps barristers in to sort of give seminars and so on, and how sort of useful you find that when it comes to instructing counsel on particular cases.
In terms of the business development, we do go to a lot of events with the barristers, and obviously we get lots of invites. The most amazing invite I have ever received is when I changed my firm, and someone who used to be a barrister's paralegal, she then qualified, well, was admitted, and she became a junior barrister. And somehow she just put my name and my surname and just put the email of my firm, and she sent me an invite to this electric shuffle game. And it came to me, and I was asking my colleagues, did anyone else receive it? Because this is not the chambers we use. And no one have heard of this chamber. So I was so curious. I took a group of solicitors and we went there just to see who invited us, because I just really wanted to see who found my email and how. And it was lovely to see her. In terms of the networking events, I received a very good tip as well from one of my learned friends. They said, if you don't want to take part at the event, if you don't want to stay for too long, like Stephen mentioned, you can research in advance. So you can choose specific people you will be talking to. So let's say 1, 2, 3 people, go to that event, talk to those people, give them your details, and leave. That must be like your target. You don't just go to have a drink. You go there with a purpose, actually. So if you enjoy the event, that's fine. If you enjoy those events, please go, please enjoy, mingle with everyone. But if you don't, you can actually make much more benefit of just speaking to that one person at the event who you need to speak to.
Great. So in the last sort of few minutes that we have, I wondered if Luke and Zaid, starting with both of you, sort of a piece of advice that you received when you started out in tenancy that you'd like to impart to the audience, or perhaps one particular aspect of a lot of the things you've shared already this evening that you'd like to sort of give as a final piece of advice or a tip. Luke?
That's a hard one. I think don't be afraid to ring more senior people. Like if you're at court, if you're doing work at home and you just don't know what to do and you need someone's help, just give them a ring. It can be scary, but they'll always help you out.
Excellent, thank you.
I would say just give it your all. Like make sure you work hard. Just don't give up putting effort in just because you've qualified. Make sure you put in 110% for every case that you do, and that will be seen by not just your lay client, your professional client will see it, your clerks will see it, and your colleagues will notice it too. So just make sure you don't, get complacent, and make sure you put in as much effort as you can on every case that you're involved in.
Excellent. Daria, a piece of advice for sort of counsel or juniors and what they should bear in mind early on in practice.
So for me personally, and I think one of the main messages I came here with is that, like, I absolutely admire barristers because they're people, very often people between the solicitors, and it's like a floodgate between losing or winning the case, a trial, say, or through the negotiation or mediation, etc. So don't be afraid to have difficult conversations with the barristers and especially with the clients as well. And I could talk about it forever because I had a few experiences in my practice where barristers were the ones who discovered critical things in a case, who discovered things like fundamental dishonesty, etc., but by just asking those difficult questions. Because as a solicitors, we do ask them, but sometimes if you work for the firm, you don't always follow the whole case through. So sometimes there would be somebody else who was working on that case, and you might get a case as a third, fourth, fifth person if it's been going for like 5 years, etc. And then just before trial, it's very important to go back to all the evidence, all the records, and scrutinize everything, because this might be like the breaking point of the case. So very important, don't be afraid to have difficult conversations, ask questions, because you don't really have as close relationship with the client as we do. So sometimes it's much easier to come from the side and just see the whole picture.
Yeah, I think that's very valuable advice. One thing I find is because where you're instructed by a professional client solicitor, you're not as close to the lay client, which is helpful for, I think, barristers, because they're able to impart very realistic advice, which they don't necessarily have to give to the lay client themselves, which can make it a lot easier to be frank about sort of prospects of success. Steve, lastly with you, I suspect I know what the answer will be, and I'm sure everyone does, hopefully, but what's your sort of big tip?
Oh God, I was going to change it. So, I mean, the obvious one is communication, but in truth, I would also say enjoy it. Like, I wouldn't do my job unless I enjoyed it. So if there's something in your practice you're not enjoying, then change it. Make that move, make that in the different area of law, because it's a long career and you may as well enjoy it while you're doing it.
Excellent. Thank you so much. A wonderful way to end the panel session. Thank you to all of you. I hope you all found that engaging and you were able to pick up some valuable practical tips about starting out in tenancy, but also how to build your practice, even if you're a few years in. I'd now like to invite Lauren Webb from Fox Williams, who will talk to us a bit more about using LinkedIn, how to market yourself online and how to grow your network. Lauren.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. Thank you for the introduction. My background is in marketing and communications. I've been doing that for the last 16 years. And in the last 6 years specifically, I've been working with chambers and law firms. When I graduated, I did a marketing qualification, and that was actually in direct and interactive marketing. Preparing this made me realize how much older I'd got quite quickly. In that time and in that module, there was no mention of social media. And actually, when I looked back, LinkedIn was only 5 years old. So since that time, it has really taken off. But when I first did one of these talks for a Magic Circle set 6 years ago, I was met with real resistance and fear. Marketing was only really starting to get going in chambers in that sense, beyond kind of business development and sort of using other tools and platforms. And I think a lot of that was because there was a lack of understanding, and also that old school mentality of keeping your connections completely behind closed doors, feeling that by putting it out there online, having connections online, that you were not going to get your business or your connections, or it was going to be stolen from you. But as a barrister, you have an opportunity to improve your own career path and that of your own chamber. And as the panel have discussed as well, you are self-employed. So there is that element of making sure that you own your own, I hate to say personal brand because it's become so cliche, but essentially you are owning your own sort of expertise and thought leadership. So I am going to share with you some practical strategies that can help you optimize your profile, elevate what you are saying, support your career, and attract those valuable connections as well. So just to start off, whether you are currently using LinkedIn, have delved in it too much in the past or not, it's useful to understand the power of LinkedIn. So just a few stats. The user base of LinkedIn is 1 billion members globally. And one of the most important things is that's growing and has been growing year on year. So while other social media platforms and platforms in general are numbers and dwindling, LinkedIn continues to grow. In 2021, they sort of launched a new module and sort of feature for users, which is called a creator mode. You might have seen it. Some people turn it on. It means that you get more stats around who's reading your content and just a little bit more in terms of the data on your own profile. And 11 million are using that. So there's this real sort of energy to become creators and like your own media within yourself. 40% of LinkedIn users engage with a page organically. So that's sort of why a lot of marketeers within businesses have started to use it and adopt it, because it really has that relevance. It's the most successful platform in terms of organic, not having to spend marketing revenue on it. And it is the #1 trusted platform amongst business B2B marketers as well. So I think all of that together really shows and demonstrates that it's not going anywhere. It is worth your attention. And the benefits of it are networking. I mean, as Steve mentioned, it's not what you know, it's who you know. Everyone has mentioned the importance of relationships. It's probably the one thing that LinkedIn is best known for. You also have the opportunity to establish your credibility and expertise. So sort of once you've got those networking opportunities, what it is allowing you to do is to show up on your network's feed and sort of in their professional life on a weekly basis, daily if you wanted, but on a weekly basis. And then that will always lead on to that sort of long-term benefit of attracting those potential clients and job opportunities. Someone remembering you as they'd I think it was your example of someone sort of sharing the win and then someone seeing that and directly responding to that. So another reason sort of why your personal page, and you could all turn around and say, okay, well, that's all great. We should all use LinkedIn, but why can't Chambers do it? Why can't the Clerk's Room manage it and do it all? So one of the most important things is that, I guess, how LinkedIn works and the algorithm. So the company pages are more restricted than a personal page in terms of how far it's shared out. LinkedIn knows that an organization and a company page has potentially money behind it. Personal people are more likely to not. They will invite them to use the premium products. So when you post something personally, the potential reach of it is far greater than if a company is to post that same thing. So that's why there's been sort of a real push towards LinkedIn and employee advocacy across a number of brands, organizations, and sectors. So I'm just going to walk through a few sort of tips and things that you can do, and I will also share with the team as well sort of a bit of a checklist that they can provide you afterwards as well. So the first few things are creating a compelling profile, and there are some super obvious tips and steps that people don't complete or say they'll come back to but don't. There is a wizard that you might have seen on LinkedIn where you can follow all of those steps. I really encourage you to make sure that that is always full, and if it's reminding you or prompting you to add new skills or an about section, that you do those things. And the purpose of that is you want to be seen by LinkedIn as having a fully optimized profile. And the reason for that is that LinkedIn is more likely to trust you. So when you do come to posting content, LinkedIn is far more likely to push that out to the audience that matches your profile. And it looks at other profiles like yours and shares it with those sorts of audiences. So make sure that you do have an up-to-date photo. As you get older, make sure that you do go back and update that. It's amazing. And Steve was giving an example just before we started of some barristers that he knows that haven't done that and that are engaging and using the platform but don't yet have their own profile. It's sort of likening to yourself. If you are out there, the first thing someone does will normally search you and see what your online footprint looks like. Make sure that it is representative of you. The next thing is your headline. So your headline is actually sort of searched and keyworded by Google as well. So make sure that you're using keywords within that. So don't just say barrister at X chambers. If you are a criminal barrister, put that you're a criminal. If you have any accolades in there that you want people to know about, mention those in there as well. You do get a good 150 words, so you can sort of expand on that. Then there's the about section, which scares a lot of people and they don't like writing for themselves. You will, I imagine, all have bios on your chambers website profiles. That's a great place to start, but I would really make sure it really reflects you. So that might be really, really professional. You might want that professional tone. If you are super stuck, there are AI tools, that's ChatGPT, and that can help you, throw up some ideas that you might not have thought of. And then you've got your experience and education section. So within that, a lot of people are more visual and more visual learners or like evidence-based examples. Something you can do in your experience section, so whichever chambers you're at, you can add, say, PDFs. So you could add judgments, for example. So if you've got some cases that you worked on that are really credible, that will really help your expertise, add those in there. If you get involved in any extra kind of curricular type activities at chambers, so say you're part of the D&I group and you organise a great event that really shows that you're bringing something extra beyond your professional work, there might be a photo of an event and you can add that to your professional experience as well, just to show that diversity within your work and what you're doing and the value that you offer and add. And then the next two sort of elements of a full profile are skills and recommendations. So your skills are almost like tags of everything that you do. They're really helpful for LinkedIn to know when you share a piece of content, who to share that out to, the different groups and industries where that should go. So really recommend making sure, I think there's a minimum that it likes. It does change that number fairly often, and it will tell you on your profile. Make sure that's up to date. And finally, sort of being young barristers and the opportunity that you have being so early in your career is the recommendations. So this is something that people really feel worried about asking people for on LinkedIn and asking for a testimonial from someone. And the recommendations really help you to build your credibility. And being young in your career, everyone likes to help someone and sort of feel like they're giving someone a leg up. So definitely, if you're coming out of pupillage, people that you've met along the way, make sure that you invite them and ask them to leave you a recommendation about your work on your LinkedIn profile. So once you have your all singing, all dancing profile, you can then become an active user of LinkedIn. And I say active because I think there's a lot of lurkers on LinkedIn that are watching a lot. there are times when that's great, but try and think about being more active. And that doesn't necessarily mean just sharing content. It also means engaging, liking, and leaving meaningful comments. And it doesn't have to take a lot of investment. Like, your time is money. I absolutely appreciate that. And that's one of the things that I think 6 years ago when I first did this, that was really, I think people felt that I've got to spend so much time on this to make it work. You really don't. It can be as much as 20 minutes a day on your commute, or you could even pick, we were sort of talking about how many sort of solicitors that you might have to connect with. You could even pick, say, 5 profiles a week just to sort of be on their profiles, see what they're posting about, engaging and making comments. If you are going to create content, really think about what it is that you want people to know you for. So as Steve had mentioned, to really start thinking about planning your career now, whether you want to take silk, those types of things, really have a think about what would you want to be known for, and what that will then help you in terms of what kind of content you create and what you're sharing. And I think the biggest thing is just to start. The great thing about LinkedIn is that there is a really low barrier to entry. It can be as simple as you read an article in the FT on the train in and you have a thought about it. You think, oh, that's actually quite interesting. It's something that you would go into chambers and discuss in the clerk's room or with another colleague. Whatever that is, that thought is, share the article and your thoughts on it. And that's the best way to get started, is to just share your expertise, what your thoughts are. It might be a judgment that you wasn't involved in at all, that doesn't create any controversy, that you want to share how, I don't know, that what you think about that, what does it mean for, does it set a precedent? And then share your expertise and experience, and work with if your chambers has a marketing function, work with that person, show them that you're engaged, go to them and say, I want to use my LinkedIn profile more. And I promise you they will love it, because in the 6 years that I've worked with chambers, It's the best thing when you get a barrister come up to you and say, I want to use my LinkedIn profile more. Can you help me? What can I do? And we'll always look after those members as well and make sure that they're being helped. But if you are sort of sitting there, like nodding to yourself, but inside there's a tiny voice saying, yeah, I'm never going to create content. Like doesn't feel right. I think people normally feel that when there's an element of whatever you're posting is being perceived negatively. And I really would encourage you just to kind of shut that out and focus on what your goal is. And it's not bragging, it's sharing your truth. As Zaid said, it's like kind of sharing your wins, and you're sharing your value and your insight. And there are lots of people that will find that interesting. One of the things that you can do is observe others. So there are options on your profile. You can set your profile, you may be aware, to private mode. So you can go and view anyone's profile and it won't show them that you've looked at their profile. The only thing about that, just a side note, is that anyone looking at your profile in the time that your profile is set in private, you won't be able to see either. So it's useful once you've finished your stalking research project to turn that back on so that you can still get the data and sort of see if people of value are looking at your profile as well. And then look at what kind of content, when you're sort of doing that research, or even if you've got your profile open and you're doing that research, have a look at sort of people that you maybe admire. What are they posting? And particularly what's getting that engagement. So you'll be able to see how many people are commenting on that, how many people are liking that, and then sort of take inspiration from that. I think once a week is all it needs to take in order for you to make a real difference. And I would really encourage you to look at your data before you start to make a concerted effort. So have a look at how many people are already visiting and viewing your content, and how many people are looking at your profile. Go and sort of take 2 to 3 weeks to make a bit of an effort, and then see what your results are. In the years that I've been working with different barristers and lawyers, I haven't yet had anyone that's come to me and said everything dropped off. Like, it just will not happen. The positivity that I've seen, I've not had a bad experience, touch wood, yet. And I can give you all a post idea to get you started for tomorrow. So you're all at an event, and this event shows that you are invested in your personal development, in your careers, in chambers. So the easiest way to do that is to either, if the Bar Council are going to share something, you can either reshare theirs and put your own comment. I would always, if you're going to reshare something, put your comments in there as well. And you can share sort of what value you learn, who you learned from, or take your own photo and share something. And the great thing about sharing when you go to an event and when you're just networking in general, events provide such a great opportunity because there's normally at least 3 or 4 people you can tag within that. And then obviously by tagging someone else, that then goes to their networks and it further expands your reach. So whenever you're at an event, whether you're speaking or just attending one, really think about how you can use that as part of your content. It's probably one of the quickest wins. So that, with sort of sharing your articles or thoughts on articles, or even what your own chambers is posting on their own news pages, use that content as well. It's already there for you. Work with chambers. Once you've kind of got that in hand and you're feeling more confident, you can then look at those advanced features like writing articles. You can create newsletters. You could create videos if that's your thing. You can join relevant groups and actively post in them and ask for what you're looking for. And I think finally, just remembering that it is a network. And there used to be a school of thought that was anyone that invites you to add to be part of their network to accept them. I think that's really changing now, and people are becoming a lot more strategic and selective. And I must be old school as well, like you, Steve, because my strategy is also to scribble on a card. And then what I would do is then when I'm then on my phone the next day or my laptop with LinkedIn, I would then send the invite request to that person. And I would add, you can personalize your message, as you probably all know. And in that, I would mention, you know, if someone said that their kids had just won something at football, I would mention that and just say it was like great to catch up and hear about whatever it was. Just adds that personal element. And I just think it makes, when you're sending that connection, it's just not that cold connection. It just means a little bit more, and you're far more likely to be memorable. So just remember that it is a network and that you are wanting to expand it, but I would really consider thinking about doing it strategically. And then I would, from that, I would always look at your success and measuring your success. So track your own profile. You are your own marketing machine, have a look and really look at what is working for me, what isn't working for me. There will be posts that don't go any further. Don't worry about it. If it upsets you that much, I've done this before. Delete it, repost it the next day, and it might do better. And gather feedback as well. You know, you're sort of all part of a bit of a community with being sort of early in your careers. There may be others in the room that you know. You can use those people to sort of send them posts, ask them, I was thinking about posting this. Is this controversial? What do you think if you saw this? And sort of open up those boundaries. Use chambers in your clerks as well. And they'll always help and sort of tell you whether something might not be quite right or if it could get you into hot water if you are worried. So in conclusion, one of the biggest things to remember is act as you would in the real world. So when you're going through and kind of doing that meaningful engagement, not just liking everything, if you like something, imagine being in a conference or in a one-on-one meeting and someone told you about something they read in the news and they gave you a really thoughtful insight on it, and you just stood there and put your thumbs up at them and didn't say a word. You would be very weird and they probably wouldn't speak to you again. If something makes you like something that much, what is it that made you like that? And can you turn that into a comment on the platform? Just doing that alone will massively increase your visibility on LinkedIn. You don't actually have to really post anything to increase your visibility and your expertise and profile. And remember that there is a long-term benefit to it. So you might not see results quite quickly. You might not be as lucky as sharing a win and getting a direct call, but over time and really putting in that effort, you will get those results. It really goes back to if you put garbage in, you'll get garbage out. If you give it the effort, if you have an optimized profile, and if you think carefully about your content, it will work for you and help you in your career. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Lauren, for sharing such a wealth of knowledge about how we can effectively use LinkedIn to market ourselves and grow our network. I'm sure there's something that we were all able to take away from that. I definitely did, and I'm definitely not using LinkedIn the right way. So some fantastic tips. I think we're going to take questions now. I think from the floor and then online. Before I ask all of you to, I'm sure you're all ready with some burning questions. But before I do, I just wanted to mention the Young Barristers Committee. And for those of you who don't know, it's a committee within the Bar Council of England and Wales. We represent and promote the interests of all practicing barristers who are within their first 7 years of practice. You might have noticed there's a QR code there in the bottom left-hand corner. Please do scan that. It will take you to a support for the Young Bar page on the Bar Council website. And there are a wealth of resources on there from sort of well-being, how to manage that, what sort of support is available for you if you're struggling, from a guide about sort of starting at the bar and all the sorts of things that you should know, from sort of how to manage your practice financially, sort of sorting out your tax affairs. It's a guide that was written by the Young Barristers Committee, and it's truly invaluable for when you start out in tenancy. So please do take a look at that. And now for the questions, please don't be shy, and do ask as many questions as you would like to our panelists and to Lauren as well. Please.
I've got two questions. First to Lauren, premium LinkedIn value, particularly, does the algorithm push your content more if you're a premium member, or is it just the sort of extra features that you get?
No, it won't necessarily. It will really come back to what you're posting. It is the other features. So one of the great things about it is the amount of information that it will give you on people who are viewing your profile. I think you can get a lot from, if it's more about the content that you're interested in, you can get a lot from just turning your profile into content creator and trying that for a little bit. I would say it's more for if you're trying to look for that business development and recruitment as well. For the premium one, it really helps you kind of connect with recruiters.
Thanks. If I can just
Yes, please do.
Well, this is to the panel more generally, though I think Steve might be best placed for my question. I think some of us, speaking me particularly, came to the bar in England in a later stage in my career. So I'm coming at it with an existing professional profile in law and a very specific area that I work in. Do you have any tips as to how to go about marketing in that context? So not sort of starting feeling the water, so to speak, in different practice areas, but really trying to be very targeted about who you connect with and how you're trying to push your business development.
Yeah, I think that I've had it recently with a barrister that's come up to me. She's moved from Hong Kong to our chambers and wants to build a practice in the UK, but obviously on the international sphere as well. And so it's reaching out to the clients that we both know. And to be honest, it's a matter of, it was interesting, one of the solicitors we spoke to who works in the BVI, as an example, who was someone that I knew, and it was just by pure chance. He said, Steve, do you know, this is great that you've introduced me to her. Actually, there might be something in the pipeline. So I think it's about utilising your connections. If you've had a past in law already, then literally don't be frightened to pick up the phone and speak to that partner at that law firm. Say, look, I'm a barrister now. I'm on the dark side, as they say. Can you please instruct me? And I think, you know, I've seen some barristers do that with great success. Really be sort of quite punchy in doing that. But I think initially it'll just be coffees and meetings, set them up.
Yes, I also would like to add, sometimes solicitors looking for different expertise as well. So you might have some technical skills, or some in medical negligence might have some medical skills, working, I don't know, as a nurse or volunteering. And if that's highlighted as well, we might be more inclined to instruct a certain barrister if we know that that person has some extra additional expertise in addition to the qualification.
I mean, definitely share with your clerks as well on that point. You know, you may speak a different language, or you may have expertise in oil, gas, or chemistry, or whatever it may be. You know, I've got barristers that speak Russian, and they threaten me that I cannot put them forward on the basis that they speak Russian.
AI as
but
well.
I'm not being funny. If a Russian oligarch rings me up tomorrow, they're being put forward.
AI as well is like very, very fast growing area. And this is probably the first event that no one mentioned AI. But if you mention that you have some expertise in that, that's kind of very fast growing area as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope that answers your questions. And especially if I think you're looking for sort of how to target a specific area. I mean, speak to your clerks and see sort of the solicitors that you can establish relationships with in a particular area, and then reach out to them and say, you know, I'd like to come and talk to sort of solicitors and juniors about this sort of topic. Would that be useful? Or are there areas that you think would be useful that I can come and speak to you about for sort of either a morning session or something even over lunch?
What is useful as well is the Legal 500 and Chambers and Partners. Go to that area of law, look at the top 10 firms in that area. There's no harm in sending them an email and you know, sand them out.
Any other questions? Yes, please.
So probably for most civil barristers or junior barristers here, over the last year, we've probably had a fair staple of, you know, approvals, credit hire. Some of us are probably a little bit sick of that kind of work. And we want to sort of be moving up to doing the multi-track work or tribunal work, inquest, something a bit more substantial. Obviously, there's a natural progression in those first few years. You see previous pupils, how they develop, and you see how junior tenants sort of start doing more complex work. Do you think that it's just best for your first 2 years, or even just first year, just to get your head down and do the basic stuff well and let that natural progression take its course? Or do you think actually you should be much more proactive in saying, I have done 2 years of fast track work now and I don't really want to be doing that anymore. I want to be doing multi-track work. I'm not sure if that's sort of sensible approach to take, or whether you should be doing a bit further than that.
Luke.
I think that you should sniff out with the clerks the reason why you're doing that level of work that you're doing. I mean, if it's the case that Chambers just needs you to do some of the more grunt work to please a solicitor, then I think you can be more straightforward with the clerks. But this is not the type of work I want to do. I want to be doing Y work instead. But if the clerks is telling you, no, the reason we're putting you out for these cases at the moment is for you to develop your skills so that in 2 years' time, we can sell you to a solicitor who does the kind of work that you want to do on the basis that you've had these 2 years of grounding and experience and advocacy, then I think you can take perhaps a more clerk-led approach. But I think the key is communication with your clerk and to be really clear with them what it is you want to do, and they can give you a timeline to how they're going to funnel you to that kind of work.
Obviously, I completely agree what Luke said there, but also I would use the solicitors that are instructing you and ask them, say that, you know, I'm interested in doing inquest work, or I'm interested in doing multi-track trials. You know, if there is an opportunity, can you bear me in mind? I think you've just got to be quite forward thinking with this now. It's not so much, I think if you roll back the years, instructions or briefs, or whatever you'd like to call them these days, would just land on people's laps and a barrister would just go and do it. But I think you're very much now in a world where it's your destiny. You can decide what you want to do. And like Saeed said, if you go out there and you're hungry and you've got that drive, then why not pick up the phone to that solicitor? I mean, obviously speak to the clerk, but communicate that first. This is what I'm thinking of doing. They're not going to say no. It saves them doing the job.
Yeah, a real ability, I think, when you're junior, but also self-employed practitioners, that you're able to sort of take the reins and shape practice the way you want it to be. And it's really in your hands. And if you have ideas about how to do it, so for example, there are certain solicitors you think it would be worth reaching out to, or the ones that you're already working with, run it by the clerks first and say, what do you think about this? Could you help me sort of find a way of reaching out and putting something together that would be attractive to sort of get me that work? So don't be afraid to sort of even come up with suggestions, even if you've not seen it done before. Any other questions? Yes.
Specifically to Luke, in a family practice, how have you found sort of preparing? Because sometimes you'll have cases which can come in very quickly. So how did you deal with that and the prep days?
Yeah, I think it's a kind of question of experience, right? So the more that you've done it, very obvious thing to say, the quicker it gets to prepare it. I think that you just have to roll with the punches to some extent and put your all into it, and understand that sometimes, you know, your evenings might be a bit at risk if you want to build that kind of practice. But I mean, in my chambers, the clerk's very understanding, like we said before, the need for prep days. And so if you do get those instructions in advance, you can take that time out. But otherwise, it might just be a case of sort of getting your head down, really. Might not be the answer that you wanted, but
In reality.
yeah.
Okay. Anyone else? Do we have questions online?
We do have one question online. So from our online audience, someone's asking, how do you manage work-life balance on a daily basis, especially those at the criminal bar?
Slade.
I don't know what work-life balance is, to be honest. The answer is you kind of don't the first year at least. It sounds silly, but what I do recommend is what's been said already. Book out some time in your diary for you to take some leave. I am fortunate enough that I take 2 months off a year now. And it's so empowering and so helpful for me to be able to take that time off. Don't be afraid to actually find a gap in your diary and be like, clerks, I'm taking that off. I'm going on holiday, don't contact me. So that's what I would say. You probably won't have much of a work-life balance day to day in terms of work that you get. I get given cases the day before, and they're not simple cases. I get given, for example, a sentencing hearing, maybe at 7 p.m. the day before, and it's at 10 o'clock the next morning. My evening will then be spent on that case. So you're just going to have to get used to that for the early part of your career until you can bring in your own work and work on your own cases without having to have that pressure. But definitely make sure you book out some time in your diary so that you can actually take some time off. And if you like to travel. If you like to go and watch concerts, go to those concerts, but make sure you book that time off. It's really important.
I think also with that, I think that one thing I certainly struggled with when I started out was learning to trust myself. Like with our cases, I'm sure for all of them, you could spend as long as you wanted preparing them. You know, there's always more research you could do. There's, you know, you could read something as many times as you like, but there's a point where you have to say, no, I do need to have a work-life balance. Like I need to go to bed, I need to have dinner, I need to see my friends or my mum or dad or whatever. And so learn to trust yourself. You know the amount of work you need to do for a particular case, you know what you need to read, and don't then flog yourself into the late hours unnecessarily. Give yourself that break.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in the early years, this job, and I think even in going on into practice, it requires a certain level of stamina. And I think, you have to bear in mind that you've got to take care of yourself first to be able to do the best job possible for your professional client, but your ultimate lay client as well. And that's when you'll perform your best as well. I always try, at least for myself, if I'm going to be in court, I try to get at least a few hours of sleep in, because you don't want to sort of let people down, especially if you've got a solicitor and a client with you in court. You've got to be performing at your best level, and only you'll know that about how much you can realistically take on. And don't push yourself too hard. If you really need the break and your diary is just too full, the clerks won't know that unless you tell them. They're managing multiple people's diaries, not just your own. So you'll need to make sure that you voice how you feel, and don't be afraid to. Any other questions?
I was just going to say that if you are at a point where it is getting too much, then have that conversation, because we can clear a diary, and there is no shame in that. If it is too much, your clerks can clear their diary. My first senior, well, I don't want to put a name to it because you might look me up on LinkedIn or something. I'll say a senior clerk that I know. He always used to say court work during the week, paperwork at weekends. It's not like that anymore. The world's changed.
That's very good. I also would like to add, if you're on holiday, if you're taking time off, just take it properly. Don't check your emails, because that's not helpful at all. I suffer myself with this syndrome that I think if I'm not there, I will miss something. I will miss an important case, because we get given cases as well, which are interesting. I will miss a case. I will miss something. No, it's not going to run away. Your cases will always find you. So I think just always, don't check your emails if on holidays, because you just get more tired.
Yeah, very sound advice. I think that's really important. If you're going to take a break, take it properly. The work will always be there. So don't worry about that. Fine. Any other questions? No? Oh, please.
I think you mentioned earlier that does that extend to criminal barristers?
I can do, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I just bought a house and I'm 27, so I think that gives an example that yes, you can. Obviously, you can't be rubbish.
Sorry,
that's really important.
No.
Don't be one of those barristers that people don't want to instruct. But if you're good, yes, you can make a lot of money. Maybe not as much as my peers, but compared to other areas of work, I mean, I call it a lottery ticket. This job is a lottery ticket. You will never make this much money in any other areas of work. You genuinely won't. And so just think of it that way. And what would you do to win a lottery ticket? Pretty much anything, I think. So that's how I would tell my peers. Don't believe what people say about the criminal bar. You can make money if you're good at it.
If you're doing publicly funded work, even if you're doing a week trial, you'll still get £3,000 or £4,000 for that week, maybe 5, depending on what you're doing. But if you're doing a multi-handed trial, either defending or prosecuting, I mean, the prosecution stuff, for example, if you get on that panel, I know so this is against his grain, but they call something called the Holy Grail. So crack, plea, and a trial. You get a brief fee for all three. So you can earn very well, well into 6 figures plus, if you're at the right set of chambers, and as long as you don't do magistrate's legal aid work.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much to all of you who are here in person and also online. I do hope you truly found it valuable and you're able to take away some real practical tips about tenancy and how to build practice as well. I hope you'll all join me in thanking our esteemed panelists for all your helpful advice.